Hi, I'm Karen MacNeil, and this is WineSpeed.com's People to Know, insider interviews with the most fascinating and important people in the wine business. And we're here today with Bret Lopez, who is the founder of the wine brand Scarecrow, a very highly in-demand Napa Valley Cabernet. So, Bret, you have an incredible story. Your grandfather was J.J. Cohn, one of the early heads of MGM Studios, and he established here in the Napa Valley the J.J. Cohn estate in 1945, right next door to Inglenook, which is just across the way here.
Well, first off, he bought the property in 1942 as a weekend getaway for his wife, who came from the East Coast and was used to the Hamptons. In 45, our neighbor, John Daniel, who was currently the owner of Inglenook, decided that he was getting more interested in Cabernet, and he didn't have any more room to plant. So he asked my grandfather, because my grandfather had 100 acres of prunes, along with everybody else in the valley, if he could nationalize a couple of acres. And so in 1945, they planted Cabernet on St. George rootstock, dry farmed it, and because my grandfather, who actually was, in essence, the first head of production at MGM, and he stayed there from the inception of the studio until 1968, he was busy making movies.
Yeah. Do you think he knew? I mean, that would have been right after Prohibition, essentially in the middle of World War II. The Napa Valley, as you point out, was full of prunes at the time. It was a very sleepy place. Do you think he knew how valuable and incredible that vineyard was going to be?
He never had a clue. He really never had a clue. His main concern was that it didn't lose money.
Yes, right.
So long as, you know, well, when Mondavi changed the paradigm of the valley and everybody started planting grapes, my grandfather, of course, planted the rest of the estate to grapes. But his only concern was that the sale of the grapes paid for the operation of the property.
Right. So you're the owner of that vineyard today, and then the wine Scarecrow, which comes from it. Even though no one likes the term cult Cabernet, Scarecrow is definitely on every collector's list. So how did it get the name Scarecrow?
Well, we wanted to honor my grandfather, and I was initially going to call it J.J. Cohn Estate, but someone told me B.R. Cohn wouldn't be very happy about that.
Yeah.
And so ultimately we decided to name it after a character in the most famous movie that he produced, which was The Wizard of Oz. I mean, we had multiple choices. We could have gone with Gone with the Wind or Mutiny on the Bounty, but The Wizard of Oz, I think, is the single most viewed film in the history of the world. Anyway, so it was sort of pick a character, and Mimi and I both felt that Scarecrow was just so kind of agricultural, and he had an instant identity, you know?
Yes.
When you say to somebody, what's the name of the wine? Scarecrow. Oh, they don't forget.
Wizard of Oz, yes. It is such an iconic American film, and of course, your grandfather was famous for making such films. You yourself were a famous photographer. How did you move from...
Yeah, I used to be somebody.
Well, you're still somebody. But how did you move out of photography and into wine?
I started shooting professionally when I was 15 years old. I just had a knack for it. And by the time I turned 50, I had totally burned out on the business end of it. It had stopped being fun. And that's why I started doing it in the first place, was because I loved it. And I literally got to the point where I just one day I threw up my hands. I said, Mimi, that's it. I'm done. I didn't take a single picture for 5 years. I went surfing, which put me back in touch with nature, you know? I mean, when you're out in the water, you're looking at a view that hasn't changed in millions of years. It's very spiritual. And then when the opportunity came about to inherit this property rather than have it sold off, Mimi and I bought it from the rest of the family, and we had a designer, Michael Vanderbilt, who's a brilliant designer. He said, you know, everybody talks about my wine and my this and my that. I said, yeah, I know, it's really nuts because it takes a whole bunch of people. And he said, yeah, that's exactly my point. And I said, maybe we should do like a photo essay or something with all the different people it takes. And he said, I love it. And I went out and hired a photographer.
Oh no, you hired a photographer.
I hired a photographer, and everyone looked at the pictures, and Mimi said, come on, Bret, you can do that. You can do it better. So I created a little natural light studio down in the barn, and by the end of that project, I was totally in love with photography again. It totally revitalized me. It was a lot of fun, and a lot of the guys, you know, we would just grab them when they were out in the field and bring them in. It was the first time they'd ever been photographed in their lives.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
And people don't realize how important those guys are. Without them, the whole thing falls to the ground.
It certainly does. Yeah. Is wine a kind of art form, in your opinion?
The way my team does it. I know that there are people who, you know, are very much into the money end of it. We set out specifically to make the very best wine we could. I had enough information to know that the grapes that I owned were considered very special. When I hired Celia, she gave me a taste of some fruit that she had harvested from our property for one of her other clients. And when I tasted that, I went, oh my God, this is why people spend money on wine. And I said to her, if you can do that with my grapes, you're hired. And we shook hands that day, and she's been with us ever since, and I don't question her. She's genuinely an artist. She knows what she's doing, and above and beyond the technical aspects, you know, she harvests by walking through the vineyard and tasting the fruit, and when it's ready, we pick.
Yeah. Yes, consulting winemaker Celia Welch is certainly one of the best winemakers in the Napa Valley. And, you know, I have to say that the one, and first time anyway, I tasted Scarecrow, I too felt like, oh, there was a rush, there was something, there was, I don't know, energy or something in that wine. What do you think it is about that wine that moves people?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I can only speak to that very first taste because very shortly thereafter I found out I had hepatitis C, and had had it for 50 years, and I was, that was the end of my drinking.
That's sad.
Yeah, so I never have actually tasted Scarecrow, but I've tasted what makes Scarecrow, and the fact that the vines that were planted in 45 are still in the ground has a great deal to do with why Scarecrow is Scarecrow. It also helps that we're on probably the best single piece of ground in the valley for Cabernet. It's just like a perfect storm. Everything came together, and this was the spot. And in a way, I guess it was fortuitous that I didn't know anything about the wine business, so Mimi and I just kind of went with our heart. It's, the first time I tasted it, it was like trumpets you know, and beams of sunlight came down and lit my heart, and my heart opened, and, you know, this voice said, "It's good." It was just, I'd never tasted anything like that in my life. And I thought, wow, this is really, really special. There's no reason not to try and make the very best wine we can. This is something people will want.
And indeed they do. Thank you, Bret. More on our interview with Bret Lopez is in winespeed.com's People to Know. I assure you, it's so fascinating, you won't want to miss it.